Hello everybody, Claudia Belinda.
Well, hello, beautiful.
Today's video is going to be all about trigger warnings.
Oh boy, the good old trigger warnings. One of the most patronizing aspects of social justice. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about them.
Trigger warning. A statement at the start of a piece of writing or video, etc., alerting the reader or viewer to the fact that it contains potentially distressing material.
Just to bring everyone up to speed who might be confused as to what a trigger warning actually is. My viewers, not hers.
It surprised me that a thing like a trigger warning attracts so much negative attention, because for me personally, I think it's quite a positive thing, and I'm going to explain in this video why I think that. To me, when a trigger warning, the idea of trigger warnings being mocked is inherently quite ableist. Because as someone who's mentally ill myself and who interacts with lots of other mentally ill people,
why does it matter if you have a mental illness? Whatever it is, you seem to have conquered it at some point in the past. I mean, considering how well spoken and composed you are, so it really shouldn't matter to you one way or another if you're reading or watching something that deals with mental illness, right?
I know that trigger warnings can be really helpful for some of us, and I'm not saying that I'm someone who finds great benefit in them all the time, but I do know of people who do find them really helpful.
I know people who find them really helpful. Ah, the good old anecdote. This is a pretty piss-poor argument to make because you could honestly make it to support any idea. I think ethnic cleansing is a good thing. I know people who have benefited from it. I think selling crystal meth to kids is a good thing. I know people who have benefited from it. Anyone, anywhere can benefit from anything, whether good or bad. Saying such a thing in defense of whatever idiot philosophy you're peddling is not a compelling argument in the slightest for it.
I'm the sort of person who tends to think if it helps just one person and it's not harming anyone else, then what's the problem with it?
The problem is that trigger warnings do harm people. Granted, not in the physical sense, but very much in the intellectual one. You see, they try to create a safe space for college students, coddling them and babying them and protecting them from the difficulties and realities that they would eventually have to face in the real world.
Now, trigger warnings are used all the time in real life, not just on the internet. I mean, if you look at food, there's always warnings about what sort of things are in that food. If you have a nut allergy, you would know to avoid it. If you're vegetarian, you would think...
I'm not even going to bother to explain why that comparison is retarded.
You also get warnings on the television if a scene is going to be particularly graphic in a show.
Scenes in TV shows and movies that show rape or violence are not in the slightest bit comparable to talking about rape or violence.
So yes, trigger warnings are used on the internet, but I think they're used in a lot of places. To me personally, I think it's common sense.
What the hell does that mean? What's common sense? I swear to God, I've watched this part of the video time and time again to try to make sense of what she means by that and how it correlates to everything else. It doesn't. It just simply doesn't.
The reason it's used a lot online in social justice spaces, I tend to find, is that especially in the communities I'm part of and the people I talk to, I'm obviously a mentally ill person and I talk to a lot of other people who struggle with mental illness, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, those sorts of things, people who are struggling with trauma. And so it's sort of a mark of respect for other people and being inclusive.
Again, you spout nonsense. What does being inclusive have to do with warning about things that could disturb someone?
I mean, when you're talking about mental illness and that kind of thing, and you know that a lot of the people that read your blog or look at your videos are going to be people who struggle with that kind of thing, you have to be really careful.
Yup, we should just censor content that makes people feel uncomfortable. God forbid they actually learn anything from reading it.
On my blog, I tag things to do with eating disorders, to do with sexual assault. What else do I tag? I tag violence. You know, the usual things that people can find very upsetting and that, you know, are obviously very understandable that people would find those things upsetting, especially the amount of people in society that have gone through these things themselves.
So why the fuck would people with a mental illness who are disturbed by other people mentioning said mental illness ever want to frequent any article or video that would cause them to be disturbed by mentions of said mental illness? I mean, fuck me, might as well not even make anything about mental illness. You can't discuss mental illness while at the same time making the discussion safe for people who happen to be disturbed by the very idea of mentioning it. It's a self-defeating and self-contradictory exercise.
At all. It's very voluntary. It's if you want to do it.
So, if you don't do it, then you are not kind and you are not inclusive. Whatever the hell it is you mean by your constant usage of the word inclusive. Is that what you're saying here?
Again, I think it's a kind thing to do. I think it's an inclusive thing to do if you can. So I try and do it, but it's not something that you're made to do.
Okay, you're right about the fact that nobody is forcing creators to implement trigger warnings. But when said creators constantly get feedback from easily offended and easily disturbed readers or viewers of theirs whining and bitching about how insensitive and cruel they are, I think it's easy to understand why they would get the feeling that they are being forced to implement said warnings.
Being triggered by something, it's something that people who suffer with post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, people who've been through very traumatic situations are very used to.
If they're used to it, then what's the goddamn problem? Why are trigger warnings even necessary then?
It's something that is recognised in the mental health community by psychologists, psychiatrists. I've spoken about this with my psychologist before.
Okay, you need to slow the fuck down a little bit there, sweetie. I'm trying to process and respond to your points, and the fact that you keep talking at such a fast rate and rambling off topic at an equally fast rate is really not making it easy for me.
And it can be very difficult. I think a lot of people don't understand if you've been through something traumatic or you have got a mental illness. It's genuinely reliving something very painful to you. It's something that can cause you a panic attack.
But you said these people were used to it.
So, for example, a survivor of sexual assault, I think it's a great idea to give them a heads up if any of your content's going to be discussing sexual assault, because you don't want that person to be having to relive that experience, because obviously it's really traumatic.
You know, Claudia, from where I'm sitting, it sounds a lot like you have a very low opinion of people who have experienced traumatic events in their lives. And it also sounds to me like you're assuming that all of these people require the same type of stimuli to reawaken any horrible events that they've endured during their life. Each person deals with trauma differently. Some people might not be affected whatsoever by mentions of sexual assault or violence. I don't deny that there are people who have the kinds of reactions that you describe to verbal or written mentions of the type of atrocities that they have been victimized by. But there is a solution to this problem. If these people can't deal with mentions of traumatizing events that have affected them in a healthy way, then it's within their best interest to get professional help. For Christ's sake, that's what psychiatrists are for. They exist to help people overcome mental illnesses and traumatic, haunting life events so that these people can function in a strong and healthy way in our society.
I talk a lot about mental health, and I'm someone who's quite suicidal at times, and I have attempted suicide twice.
Have you? I mean, if triggering or harmful content meant as much to you as you say it does, I kind of doubt you would discuss suicide attempts in such a casual and passive manner. But I could be wrong.
So I personally like it if I'm reading content or watching a video online about mental health and someone gives me a heads up and says I'm going to be talking about suicide or my own suicidal time, because for me it's quite difficult when I'm not in the zone to think about that kind of thing, because it's something I struggle with quite a lot.
Jesus Christ, it's not the responsibility of the writer and creator to warn you if you become disturbed by mentions of suicide. It's your responsibility to get psychiatric help to overcome your discomfort with ideas of suicide. We've been over this.
And again, that's not me trying to censor their content or anything. It's not me saying, you have to not talk about it because I'm here.
No, maybe it's not you trying to censor people's content, but a lot of other social justice warriors seem to be lobbying for that very idea.
It's just me saying, it would be great if you could give us a heads up. So if that's the sort of video that I'm going to find upsetting, it's no problem to you, but I'm not going to watch this one.
So why do you have to click on the video or the article to know what it's going to talk about? I mean, aren't you capable of reading a fucking title or a header?
Now again, talking about being triggered, which is something that gets mocked quite a lot, and you always hear about special snowflakes and social justice warriors being triggered by everything, being triggered by a bad word, but it is a real thing.
Yes, indeed, it's a real thing that happens to people who are too stupid or petty to enlist the aid of mental health professionals.
This is the definition of a trauma trigger from Wikipedia. Trauma trigger is an experience that causes someone to recall a previous traumatic memory, although the trigger itself need not be frightening or traumatic and can be indirectly or superficially reminiscent of an earlier traumatic incident.
Hey Claudia, you know what this exact same article talks about? Treatment for trauma triggers.
So again, the reason I read that to you is just so you know that it is a real thing. It's not something that's just sprung up from the online social justice community. It's something that is recognised, and if you want to look it up yourself, there's plenty of reading on why being triggered is a real thing, why people with trauma can find trigger warnings really helpful. Just so you know it's real, because a lot of people want to pretend it's made up by people online trying to pretend things are wrong with them. But it's a real thing that's recognised.
I'm not disputing the fact that triggers are a real thing. However, I am saying that based on what you've talked about in this video, and based on the experiences most people have had dealing with people bitching and moaning about being triggered, is that either these people are pretending to be traumatized and they antagonize other people just for attention, or they do have real emotional damage, but they refuse to get help and they simply look for other people to blame for the atrocities in their life. Either way, it's not looking very good for your case.
So I wanted to read two definitions of trigger warning. So I've gone for the Geek Feminism Wiki and the Urban Dictionary. So here's the Geek Feminism definition of trigger warnings. Trigger warnings are customary in some feminist and other safe spaces. They are designed to prevent unaware encountering of certain materials or subjects for the benefit of people who have an extremely strong and damaging emotional response. For example, post-traumatic flashbacks or urges to harm themselves to such topics. Having these responses is called being triggered. They also talk here about things which are usually tagged in safe spaces or social justice or feminist spaces. So we've got like descriptions of war, because you have lots of veterans who come home from war who are in danger of being triggered by that kind of thing, and it really messing up their day.
Oh yeah, those poor veterans. If only they had access to psychological help or something. Oh wait.
Okay, the Urban Dictionary definition of a trigger warning, which is very anti-trigger warnings, is this. Trigger warning. A phrase posted at the beginning of various posts, articles or blogs. Its purpose is to warn weak-minded people who are easily offended that they might find what is being posted offensive in some way due to its content, causing them to overreact or otherwise start acting like a dipshit. Popular on Reddit, SRS, or other places that social justice warriors like to hang out. Trigger warnings are unnecessary 100% of the time due to the fact that people who are easily offended have no business randomly browsing the internet anyways. As a result of the phrase's irrelevance, most opinions that start out with this phrase tend to be simplistic and dull, since they were made by people ridiculous enough to think that the internet is supposed to cater to people who can't take a joke. Now, I find that description of trigger warnings quite despicable, actually, and I think it's quite disgusting.
Well, I'm sure you have a very substantial and logically reinforced set of arguments to support that opinion.
Because it completely discounts all those people that we've spoken about before who suffer from mental illness, post-traumatic stress disorder, those kind of things.
People who go through trauma should be getting help in dealing with said trauma. Fucking hell, woman, how many goddamn times do I have to repeat myself?
That people who are easily offended have no business browsing the internet anyways. I won't really get into arguing this specifically, but surely, if this person is very offended themselves, they obviously got themselves into quite a state about people using trigger warnings.
There's a big difference between being offended and being annoyed. I think it's quite safe to say that the guy who wrote this definition falls into the latter category. Also, great job calling the kettle black by stating how this guy was offended when you yourself so boldly claimed that his definition was despicable.
But I think it is really bad to assume that people that are going to experience bad emotional distress from certain things shouldn't be on the internet. I mean, this person who wrote this and the people who think like this, you guys don't own the internet. Surely it's okay for other people, and great that other people can use the internet as well, and maybe they don't use it in the way that you would.
And that means what exactly?
And maybe you think that they're extra emotional, but is it doing any harm to your life?
You know, I hate for this to be the second video in a row that I've actually brought this up, but yes, it has done harm to my life. I've had friends who I had known and loved for years who disowned me as a friend for saying shit that offended them. Needless to say, it broke my heart and caused me a lot of emotional turmoil. I can't officially speak for anyone else on that, but I'd be willing to bet quite a lot of other people have gone through the same thing.
To me, it's like the argument from people who are straight arguing against same-sex marriage, because it's kind of like, if you don't like it, it's not impacting your own marriage. I mean, you don't have to get a marriage to someone of your own gender.
That's a hell of a false analogy you've got going there, sweetheart. Comparing trigger warnings to marriages.
So, of course, they called people who overreact to things dipshits. Again, I mean, would you say that to the face of a veteran who's come home from the war?
I would pray that most veterans would have the common sense to find a way to deal with all the shit they've been through and, in the meantime, circumvent any sources they could come across that might indicate that they'll touch upon ideas that would potentially disturb them in some way.
I think a little bit more compassion is needed by people who think like this, because that's what it is. It's just a very, for me, it seems very selfish and very devoid of compassion.
An emotional appeal is not an argument. Next.
One argument I see against trigger warnings from quite a few people is that they say that people avoiding their triggers is bad for them, because you should be exposed to the things that give you anxiety and that give you fear, and you shouldn't hide from them and be kept away from them, because you need to obviously get back into the real world, as they call it. Now, I understand where this is coming from.
Do you?
Instances, you are correct. Exposure therapy, when it comes to anxiety, that kind of thing, can be really helpful. It's something, with my own issues, I've talked to my therapist about, and we've had this discussion. So I do understand a little bit about it, and you're right that that can work. But I think the point that these people are missing is that if you're going to do that sort of exposure and that sort of work, it's something that has to be done on the person who's ill or needs the help. It has to be done on their terms.
Okay, here's a question I have about that. What if that person never decides to take the next step to heal themselves mentally? What if they forgo all sessions of therapy just to use their past atrocities as justification to be assholes to people? I mean, therapists can be open to giving their patients time, but only to a point. If the patient draws it all out, then they're wasting time and money, both for themselves and for the therapists, who could be spending their time helping other people instead of your lethargic ass. Alright, that's basically all there is. She goes on to repeat her main points and repeat a bunch of other points that I already responded to, so there's really no use in prolonging this any further. Her bottom line is that everyone should be more compassionate to lazy assholes who skip therapy and use their mental illnesses and past traumatic experiences to treat everyone else like shit and demonize people who make articles or videos for offending them or rekindling emotional baggage of theirs that they never bothered to fix. Another day, another insidious social justice warrior idea crushed by yours truly. You know, I almost feel bad. I really have a thing for English girls. Oh well, there's always next time. Have a great day, take care, and hunt well.